Hello, my name's Ben Bohr, and I'm on the Sloan Research Papers team. And it's a pleasure of mine to introduce our next speaker. That's Professor Clayton Graham, and he'll be presenting Diamonds on the Line, Profits Through Investment Gaming. And the presentation will last 20 minutes, after which we'll have some time for Q&A for approximately 5 minutes. So I ask you, please hold your questions until then, and I'll come around to those who raise their hand, trying to get them to the mic so they can ask their question. So with that, please join me in welcoming Professor Graham.
Thank you, Ben. How many of you bet on the Super Bowl this year and picked the Patriots? So you're the only people in the room that bet on the Patriots. How many bet on Seattle? Oh boy. How many are from the West Coast? Okay. That answers something right there. Did you know that only 10% of the people that bet in sports betting come out with a profit? So you're not starting out too good when you start out in sports betting. But it's a pleasure to be here in Boston again, a lot of familiar faces, and we're going to have a good time today. Is it on? See some familiar faces up there, I hope. Why are we here? We want to build an analytical model on baseball to tell us on what teams we should bet in and how much to bet in order to maximize a 30-day moving average of profits and subject to economic constraints and certain risk tolerances. About 7 or 8 years ago, Jeff Ma, who was a frequent speaker here at the conference, and is Jeff here? I don't see him, Jeff. But he came to DePaul and gave a little session on card counting 101. And one of the things that was interesting is I showed him a spreadsheet I had, and he saw it was on one of the games for that particular day, and he said, "It's not gambling. That's the point. We're talking about investing and not gambling." So we had to do some research about the gambling community, and first thing we had to do is find some experts. So we went out to find our crack research team in the bowels of the Wise Guy Lounge at Caesars in Los Angeles, and in Las Vegas, and you can see the high intensity of these people that were down there. Then I was lucky enough, I had a friend at Wharton, and he invited me over to use their brand new high-speed mainframe, and that took a little bit longer. But what do you expect from Wharton? Okay, now we have some questions. Do you know that 70% of the bets in baseball, that's right, okay, we're okay. Okay, are favored. 70% of the time the home team is favored, yet the home team only wins 54% of the time. The road team, who is favored only 30% of the time, wins 46%. So you're talking about overrated for the home teams and undervalued for the home teams and undervalued for the away teams. So there's a big difference and a high tendency toward betting on the home team. This characteristic is going to come through when we take a look at some other stuff. Now, worldwide gambling is about between $1 trillion and $600 million annually, depending on which source you're taking a look at. 80% of the money spent on gambling worldwide is illegal. And in Las Vegas only accounts for less than 1% of all the legal gambling in the world. So it's a relatively small thing going on in Las Vegas. This particular chart shows the relationship between strikeouts per base and balls and the scoring. It's really interesting, and it doesn't have a lot to do with this presentation, but I like the looks of the chart, so I just want to throw it up there. Now, how it works. We're going to take a look at 3 categories of information. The first thing is to look at the line. How many of you people are familiar with the money line? Okay. How many are familiar with the over-under? How many are familiar with the spread? And the grand salami? Yeah, the real diehards. Okay. We're only going to be talking about the money line today. And first of all, we want to know what it is, what it represents for you. For most of you, it'll be going over some very basic stuff, but we want to get into the implications of what it means, and in particular, the implication of the probability of winning. Then we're going to look at the game itself, where we take a look at the batter-pitcher matchup for the day, the teams compared, the road and home, in terms of the variability of scoring and scoring against. And then we're going to put those things together and come up with a probability of winning the game using not traditional ways of calculating, which you'll see. So then finally we come to making a decision. The point of embarkation is the edge, which is the difference between the implied probability from the line and the actual probability from winning the game. And then we go into a big loop of optimizing using genetic programming to come up with the best 30-day moving average of the profits. We're trying to capitalize on making a buck. Now, if you take a look in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, you'll see a miniature of the previous slide, and then the points we're talking about on this side. So you can always go up to the left-hand side and see where we are. And I put that up there so I don't get confused, which is pretty easy. Okay, the money line is essentially the price of the bet. You have a money line of minus 113 for the road team, the home team of 105. They're the favorite and underdog respectively, and minus 13 literally means you're risking $113 to win 100. That's all. The underdog pays off in a different direction. You're risking $100 to win 105. Now, looking at an even bet, just to place things in context, minus 110 road, minus 110 home. So that should be a 50-50 bet, and that's exactly what it's going to come out to be. It's called a dime line because you can see the tens there. And then if you take a look at how the house does, it receives $220 for 2 bets. The winner gets $210 back, so the house has a profit of 10 or 4.5%. That's the vig. That's what the house gets and makes it, assuming everything is equalized out. Now, what's interesting, looking at all the winning lines between 2007 and 2014, you can see the disparity. 60% of the time, the favorite won. 40%, the underdog won. Okay, that's nice. What is interesting is the median value of a winning bet was minus 115. So on average, the house was making 15 on the bet, not the usual type of 10. So they're doing pretty well on making money on the people that overbet on usually the home team and the favorite. Now, we want to get down to the implied probability of winning. Remember, we're going to find out 2 probabilities of winning, that derived from the line and that derived from the game. So here we have an implied probability of winning. You can just see it there, 113, which is the cost over the cost plus the payout. 113 plus 100 equals 53%. That's for the road team. You see a similar number for the home team, except that totals 101.8%. And that's not so good. So we normalize it and divide out, and we make sure it's up to 100%. So that's where we are right now. And we're really trying to get into the prediction business. So I found this from one of the great stalwarts of philosophical history related to baseball, the great Yogi Berra. And I think those words explain things pretty accurately. In baseball literature, one of the foremost things we see is the baseball's Pythagorean theorem. The number of runs squared divided by the number of runs for the home team squared, the number of runs for the away team squared. And this is an approximation of the probability of winning. Everybody, I don't know if everyone's seen it, but it's a fairly common thing, one of the Bill James things. I wanted to build a production function to get down to the number of runs to be scored. And the first thing I look at is only things that generate production. Singles, doubles, triples, homers, base on balls. And I do that all with looking at the percentage of those of plate appearances. Very important because it places everything in a relative context. So you can use those type of numbers for looking at the players, the teams, and make comparisons among and between them. And it's in terms of runs per out, and of course, runs per out times 27 will give runs per game in forecasting. The equation comes out like you see here, and we must force a zero intercept because we don't want to give credit to anyone that doesn't do anything. I mean, you have to be productive or it doesn't make sense. And then we look at this, we look at the distribution of runs per out. And you can see this was fit, and you can see up on the left there was a distribution fit, and it fit the gamma distribution, my favorite distribution. And then we go to the runs per 9-inning game, and we have a similar type of thing. The gamma distribution is particularly unique because it has all kinds of nice mathematical properties. First, the domain of the function is that it starts at 0, so we don't have any negative numbers or anything else like that, except in the case of Cubs, and you always get negative numbers with the poor Cubbies. We look at the first moment of the mean and the variance, and we're able to solve for the two parameters of the gamma function in terms of the mean and the variance. So we already have the mean from our expected value of runs from our production function, but now we have to get that variance. Variance is probably an underused statistic when it comes to looking at baseball numbers, and the disparity is probably more important than the mean in many cases. Inconsistent with my philosophy of only listing 5 items on a slide, I just want you to take a look at the columns where we're talking about time, variance, and ranking. And if we highlight this, we can see that we get the ranking for the road team at home and how they scored, and it's runs scored versus runs allowed for the home and away team. And you're able to determine the variance. The additive property of variance allows you to calculate that for each of the road and the home team. So now we have the mean, we got the variance for the two. These are good things. And we want to make sure that we have those two things for each team. Now we go and we start to filter some of the stuff out. We don't want to look at every single game. There's certain things that are important. And we're going to highlight it more in detail, but you see such things as this net rank, which we're going to talk about in a moment, expected value of runs, which is the common thing, but you see percent difference. It's the range of differences between all these different variables that's making a difference. Not their absolute level, but how well one team compares to another. Baseball is a game of matchups. And here, what I call the rankmeister and the impact of different time. One of the things that's so important is that how much of a time period do you look at the data? You look at from the beginning of the season, do you go back to last year, you only look at the past month? You just don't know all these things until you start putting them down and trying them out. And because of the genetic programming algorithm, I'm able to optimize the number of days that we look at. And we generally found that the data was most pure and most fresh and most accurate in the 60 to 70 day period. And here I rank the teams, offense and defense, and I get a number called, it's the Rankmeister number. And like 13 is a nice number, and things that are above 10 or something like that are pretty good, showing the home team strength. Negative numbers, like if it was minus 10, it would show a stronger road team. And you can see how these vary. This is for a game between Detroit and Seattle. So with a 64-day period, it came out Detroit had a strong Rankmeister number, and in the case of Seattle, not so much. Now, if we go on and take a look, there we go. If we take a look at some of the specifics, in statistics, you want to have a big N. And this is the plate appearances. You get numbers too small, you don't want to have them involved. So we have minimum criteria for home and road teams and how many plate appearances are actually in the sample that we can match them up. Very critical to have a good number of N's, if you will. And then likewise, for expected value of runs, you want to have a greater percentage. We're trying to raise the probability of winning by all this stuff. So we put a cap on the center section and only are looking at the tails, basically. And we do the same thing for strikeout for base and balls and the on-base percentage plus slugging. These are key, all the elements. And when they all meet all the criteria, the stars are aligned and things are looking good. And then we go and adjust it for the different ballparks, which is an inevitable situation. And now we're able to look at the density function of the number of runs. We'll be looking at two gamma distributions, one for Seattle, one for Detroit, and we're going to get a distribution of what the runs looks like. Here you can see at the top, as you're looking at it, on the left is the Seattle Mariners gamma, and on the right is the Detroit Tigers. Big difference just from looking at them. And likewise, if you look at the numbers the graph at the bottom, that's the distribution of runs. And if you just go to the, let's see here, and if you look at the top, it accumulates how much are to the right of 0, so you know what the real probability of winning is, and it's about 57% using this methodology. Using the Pythagorean, baseball Pythagorean with density functions rather than with just point estimates, you get the same two gamma distributions, but then you look at the bottom and you see the distributions of the probability of winning. That's actually a density function of the probability of winning. And you can see it's kind of bimodal, and here the probability is 58% that you're going to have better than a 50 chance of winning. So this is what I use in terms of the probability of winning the game. And if we look at the different methods, the run differential, the density function differential, and then the classic Pythagorean, you see it ranges basically from 57 to 63%. That's huge. That's huge. So using a density function will add a degree of accuracy which hasn't been there before. And the difference between the line probability of winning and our density function probability of winning is the edge. Everyone, who doesn't want to get the edge? How many people are on the edge? Well, okay, good stuff. Now, in the book Trading Bases by Joe Pita, he was an options trader and developed basically a risk formula for as the edge got larger and larger, you should invest more into that particular investment. And he did this for baseball, except for one thing. This is for when he was winning somewhere in the 55 to 58% winning totals. Because of all our filters, we are doing much, much better than that. So I took his function, had to make sure I had the capabilities to raise it up and shift it to the right so we could raise our amount of investment. And we used a generalized S-curve, and we played around with it and got it to fit and also incorporate that into our genetic programming model. And here you're able to see how you can change the lower limit of your investment to match the curve that you want, which is determined exogenously, and see how the curve shifts up and down. And on the right shows the percent of the bankroll to invest. And once you have your curve, you just have to move down to the bottom, go down to the bottom pointer, and just move it to the edge and see how much you would actually invest on a given day's function. This curve changes every day. But the edge, you just move that and then tells you where you should make it. And what is interesting, in card counting, I have that little icon there of Beat the Dealer. How many are familiar with Thorpe's book, Beat the Dealer? The classic book on card counting. Yeah, anyone that's talking about gambling should read that. And card counting, the payoff is the same each time. The probability of winning varies depending on the content of the deck that you're getting out of there. Baseball's a little different. The probability of winning changes and also the payoff changes. So we have two things going at the same time and must take care of both of those things. Does it work? This shows the first 2 months that I was doing, after doing some bad work last spring, we made some updates, and traditionally I've been making, let me go into that in a second. This is what happened the first 2 months, and is anyone satisfied to double their money in 2 months? Who's unsatisfied with doubling your money in 2 months? Okay, I showed this chart because of scale. The next chart, anybody happy about making tenfold in 4 months? So it's pretty serious numbers. And one of the biggest faults you see with gamblers is they bet too much on too many teams. And I can't emphasize that enough. And so my percentages of betting, my average size bet was only 3.5% of my bankroll. That was the average. What meant that half of them were well below that. So it happened. We felt pretty good. And so this is the way it came out for the season. One thing that's happened to me all the time is that the last 2 weeks of the season, I know I always lose money. 10 years in a row, I lose money because I always think I get smarter at the end. I get more stupid because I do it over and over again. I will never bet the last 2 weeks of the season. Troublesome stuff. But here we see we had a 14-fold increase. And some of the summary stuff we have here is winning percentage of 68%. Average daily return on risk capital, 35%. Yes, that's per day. Overall return on original bankroll, 1,400%. Average bets per day, just about 2. Average size bet, 3.5%. Percent of the games invested, 23. And the edge literally allowed us to double our profits. Some of the important things with respect to modeling contribution, we use runs per out. Game day batter-pitcher matchups only. Road variance calculated in a scientific way. Dynamic time variable to optimize the freshness of our database. Monte Carlo simulation to get more accurate numbers. And genetic programming and filters to provide a powerful tool. In short, we want to go where the numbers take us. And you got to remember, did you guys see the movie Back to the Future? In there, they say the Cubbies are going to win in 2015. Now, just because we do the analytics doesn't mean we can't be a fan. Now, this is the year for the Cubbies. You like Chicago? Okay, now it's time for your phenomenal questions. And we got, if the question's good, you get a prize. No one wants a prize. Right here in the front. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So I had 2 questions, if that's okay. My first was, why did you decide to use genetic algorithms as your algorithm of choice for your modeling? And my second is, I didn't see it in the slides. I may have missed it if you put it, for your percent of bankroll that you're risking. What is it in relation to Kelly criterion, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, Kelly criteria, for you don't know, is a method for choosing the size of the bet based on the expected value of return on investment. There's a close relationship between the Kelly number and the edge, and you can do those things. Kelly generally overestimates how much you should be betting. I've modeled both of them, and I never used the Kelly because it would just overinvest like way too much, and so I don't do that. You asked why I use genetic programming for it. I've had a lot of experience in nonlinear programming, and just being able to use genetic programming was just a lot easier. I could put more variables and be more specific, and also the software I use, I can do it either deterministically or with density functions throughout, and so I use Palisade Software's at-risk evolver, and it's just very, very powerful stuff. It's just easier to use. Certainly. Oh, that was a good question. So, would you pass this back? He gets a phenomenal T-shirt. So, if someone can... oh, you're going to throw it back or just steal it? Oh, okay.
So back on the genetic algorithm, you said that it was somewhere between 60 and 70 days. Historically, was the sweet spot.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, were you using that algorithm to determine that time frame, and then it became a rolling average, or were you weighting those days differently? You know, the historical.
Good point. The profit function is maximizing the dollar profits over a 30-day moving average period. Okay, and then in terms of the days, I'm just shifting back and forth. In the algorithm itself, it's running it between, let's say, 150 and 45 days to find out what works the best. And it's amazing how much it repeats itself in this relatively small range between 60 and 70. And the genetic programming algorithm is just easy to use.
Thank you.
That was a good question, too. So Felix Hernandez, I ain't.
You talked about the importance of quantifying variability, and then in your graphs at the end where you show the profit, you didn't talk about any variability. Do you have a sense of how much variability there would be in your profit if you were to repeat this over and over again?
Yeah, I do have it, and I just haven't, it's just in the pile of numbers somewhere. The sigma is very small on the profitability per day. When you're hitting 68%, you're making money almost every day, and then when the days that you don't have it, the amount that you invest is substantially lower. So you get a pretty tight range. I know that's not good. Paper number 2 will have that.
And this is our final question.
When you're
Would you pass
making
this back to? Thank you.
when you're making your bet, are you worried about the betting market and where the number's going to head? And when do you decide to actually make your bet during the day to get the best actual number?
A lot of people wait, when I have my numbers, I know what the line is and if it makes economic sense. It's whenever the line is that generally earlier in the day, the number is further away from my number. So I generally am betting earlier in the day because history has shown me that I can make more money if I do it earlier. But the time of the day has no effect of when I bet. It's just whatever the numbers are. Then it goes through the algorithm and the genetic program, and it tells me how much I should bet on that. And of course, if the line changes, that'll change how much I would bet.
Great. Please join me in thanking Professor Graham.
Thank you. Thank you.